Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are looking at a kind of paradox. We're talking about a global phenomenon that is, at its heart, all about being quiet.
That's a great way to put it. It's a very loud noise about silence.
Exactly.
Yep.
We're talking about a man who the New York Times called, and this is a direct quote, the most popular spiritual author in the United States.
And that was years ago. He's only gotten bigger since then.
Right. His books are in, over 33 languages now? He's the man who sat on the couch with Oprah Winfrey, not just once, but over and over again, to lead millions of people through what he calls a new earth.
Of course, we are talking about Eckhart Tolle.
Eckhart Tolle, a name that, it's become almost a brand in itself.
It has, yeah. And depending on who you talk to, he's either this profoundly enlightened modern sage or something else. A pop culture curiosity, maybe.
And that's really the mission of this deep dive, isn't it? To get under the hood of that. Because the story, the actual trajectory of his life is what I find so fascinating.
It's a truly bizarre metamorphosis. We are trying to understand how a clinically depressed, suicidal Cambridge graduate student,
Top of his game academically.
the absolute pinnacle, how that person transforms into a homeless mystic, literally sleeping on park benches in London. And then, as if that weren't enough, transforms again into this global icon who shows up on albums with Kendrick Lamar.
When you just lay it out like that, it sounds like fiction. Like a movie script you'd reject because it's just too unbelievable.
It really does. But we've got the sources, the biographical records, the publication histories, the sales numbers. It's all there.
And we're also digging into the reception, the critical reviews, not just from, secular newspapers, but from serious theologians who have very strong opinions about him.
Oh, very strong. Both for and against.
I think for me, the hook, the thing I just can't get past is that central contrast. You have a man who spent 2 years doing nothing but sitting on a park bench in Russell Square, just watching the world.
In a state of bliss, or so he claims.
Right, in a state of bliss. And that same person, the guy who's literally sleeping rough on Hampstead Heath, ends up shattering publishing records. How do you get from the park bench to the top of the bestseller list?
That's the billion-dollar question, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
How does doing nothing become a multi-million-dollar global enterprise?
So for everyone listening, that's what we're going to unpack. We are going to dig into the specific aha moment that apparently changed his entire life, what his followers call his transformation.
The night of 1977.
That's the one. Then we'll look at the mechanics of his rise to fame because it wasn't an overnight thing. It was a slow burn and then an explosion.
The Oprah effect.
The Oprah effect, definitely. And finally, we are going to dive deep into that really polarized reception because for every person who sees him as a spiritual savior, there's an academic or a theologian who thinks he's peddling, mumbo-jumbo.
Or worse, a dangerous heresy that undermines established religion. We're definitely not shying away from those arguments.
No, we want the whole picture. So let's start at the beginning. The origin story. Who was Eckhart Tolle before he was Eckhart Tolle? Because he wasn't born with that name.
No, not at all. He was born Ulrich Leonard Tolle in 1948.
In Lunen, Germany.
Right, small town near Dortmund. And you have to think about the context. 1948, post-war Germany.
That's a heavy setting to be born into.
Extremely. The country is just,
Yeah.
it's in ruins. Not just physically, but psychologically, morally.
Yeah.
The collective trauma is immense, and he's born right into that rubble.
And his early home life, from the records, it sounds like it was pretty unhappy.
Yeah, his parents fought a lot, and they eventually separated. This seems to be a key factor. At age 13, he moves to Spain to live with his father.
And this is where the story takes its first really weird turn.
It really is. It's a detail that just jumps off the page in his biography. From the age of 13 to the age of 22. He refused all forms of formal education.
He just opted out of school for 9 years.
Completely. He just said no. And his father, which is maybe even more remarkable, seems to have just let him.
In the 1960s, that's a huge decision for a teenager to make and a pretty radical parenting choice.
It really is. It suggests a kid with a very strong will, or maybe a father who is just very hands-off, almost neglectful. But the interesting thing is, he wasn't just, loafing around. He was pursuing his own interests.
So he was basically homeschooling himself before that was really a thing.
You could see it that way.
Yeah.
He was studying language, literature, philosophy. He was on his own curriculum. And then at age 15, he gets a gift that seems to have planted a very specific seed.
The books.
The books. A set of 5 spiritual books by a German mystic named Joseph Anton Schneider Franken.
Okay, not a household name for most of us.
No, he's better known by his pseudonym Bo Yin Ra. He was a significant figure in German esoteric circles, and the sources say Tolle was heavily influenced by these writings.
So just picture this. You're a teenager, you've completely rejected the school system, you're living in Spain, and you're not reading comics, you're reading these dense German mystical texts about the nature of the soul.
It's a very unique incubation period, isn't it? It just wires your brain differently when you're not being socialized by your peers and teachers, but by these, deeply esoteric ideas.
But eventually the real world has to intrude. You can't just read philosophy forever.
Right. So at 19, he decides to get back into the system. He moves to London, to England.
And what does he do there?
For about 3 years, he teaches German and Spanish at a language school. But I think he realized he needed credentials if he wanted to go further. So the intellectual engine really kicks in.
He decides to go to university.
He does. He ends the University of London. And here's the kicker. The kid with no high school education absolutely excels. He crushes it.
That says a lot about his raw intelligence. To go from zero formal schooling for 9 years to thriving at the University of London.
It's incredible. And he doesn't stop. He graduates with a first-class degree. And by 1977, he's enrolled in a postgraduate program at the University of Cambridge.
Cambridge, I mean, that's the summit, the absolute top of the academic mountain.
It is. He's 29 years old. He's on track for a doctorate. On paper, this is the ultimate success story. The self-taught kid from a broken home makes it to the most elite institution in the world.
But on the inside, it was a completely different story.
A catastrophe. An absolute catastrophe.
Which brings us to this pivotal moment. The night of 1977.
The turning point. The event that everything else in his life pivots around.
The sources describe him suffering from these long, intense periods of depression. But it sounds like it was more than just, feeling sad.
Oh, it was existential dread. He describes it as a state of almost constant high-level anxiety, punctuated by these deep dives into suicidal depression. He felt like his own mind was torturing him.
He was searching for answers in academia and philosophy, but it was just making things worse.
It was making it heavier. The intellect was just adding more layers to the problem. And on this one particular night, in his small London apartment, it all reached a breaking point.
He's recounted this story many, many times, right?
Yes, and the details are always very consistent. He says he woke up in the middle of the night with a feeling of absolute unbearable dread. The silence felt hostile. His own existence felt like this immense burden.
And then a thought came into his head. A very specific sentence.
I can't live with myself any longer.
Okay, let's just pause on that for a second, because that's a phrase people use all the time. It's almost a cliche. Ugh, I'm so embarrassed I can't live with myself.
Exactly. It's a figure of speech, a cry of despair. But Tolle's mind, and maybe this is where the Cambridge linguistic training comes in, didn't just let the sentence go by. He stopped and looked at the grammar of it.
He started analyzing the sentence while he was in the middle of a suicidal breakdown.
It sounds absurd, but that's what he says happened. He looked at the structure. I cannot live with myself.
And he asked himself a question.
A critical question. If I cannot live with myself, there must be two of me.
The I and the myself.
Precisely. And in that moment, he had this sudden, shocking realization. He saw that there was an I, the witness, the consciousness that was aware, and then there was a self, this unhappy, heavy, mind-made story, the story of Ulrich Tille, the depressed student.
So he saw that the self he was suffering from was just a mental construct.
A fabrication, a collection of thoughts and memories and fears that he had mistaken for his true identity. And in the moment he saw that distinction, he says he felt himself being drawn into a void.
A void sounds terrifying.
He says it was terrifying at first. An intense inner trembling. It felt like an annihilation. And he says the mind-made self, with all its problems, its history, its constant worrying, it just collapsed. It dissolved.
The psychological self died.
That's the language he uses. The egoic structure that was causing all the pain just short-circuited and died. But the core awareness, the I, remained. He says he lost consciousness after that.
And the next morning. What happens when you wake up from the death of your ego?
Well, this is where the story shifts from what you might call a psychological event to a mystical one. He says he woke up, opened his eyes, and everything was miraculous.
Miraculous, how?
He describes the light coming through the curtains as if he'd never really seen light before. He looked at mundane objects, a chair, a pencil on his desk, and saw them as vibrant, alive, without any mental labels.
He wasn't thinking that's a pencil.
He was just seeing the isness of the pencil, and he went for a walk. And even the chaotic London traffic felt deeply peaceful to him.
How is that even possible?
Because, in his telling, the filter was gone. The voice in the head that judges everything. That car's too loud. I hate this weather. I'm running late. That constant commentary had just shut off.
The mental static was gone.
It was gone. There was just pure presence, a deep, unshakable peace.
And this wasn't just a good mood that wore off after a few hours.
No, it stayed. It became his new baseline. But, this profound internal shift had some very immediate external consequences.
I can imagine. It's probably pretty hard to finish your Cambridge doctoral thesis when you're in a state of blissful oneness with a pencil.
Exactly. The ambition, the drive to achieve, which is almost entirely ego-driven, it just vanished. So he dropped out of Cambridge.
Just walked away.
Stopped his studies immediately.
Yeah.
And for the next 2 years, he enters this phase of his life that is, I think, the most confounding for people.
The park bench years.
The park bench years. He spent most of his time, day after day, just sitting on park benches in Russell Square in central London.
Just sitting there.
Just sitting.
Yeah.
Watching the people, the traffic, the pigeons. He describes it as being in a continuous state of deep bliss.
Okay, I have to ask the practical question. How did he eat? Where did he live? You can't pay rent with bliss.
It was very precarious. He stayed with friends sometimes, ran a Buddhist monastery. He had some savings that he ran through. But the sources are very clear. There were periods where he was homeless. He slept rough on Hampstead Heath.
A Cambridge postgraduate sleeping on Hampstead Heath? I mean, it's a shocking image. London is not a forgiving place to be homeless.
No. It's cold, it's damp. From the outside, this looks like a complete and utter failure, a tragic breakdown.
And his family, what did they think of all this?
They were, as you can imagine, horrified. The sources say his family considered him irresponsible, even insane.
And you can see their point of view, right?
Oh, absolutely. From the outside, you don't see a mystic having a breakthrough. You see your brilliant son or brother who had a golden ticket to an academic career throw it all in the bin to become essentially a vagrant.
It's that classic line between enlightenment and madness.
And it really depends on which side of the experience you're on. For him, it was liberation. For them, it was a disaster.
So during this period, when does Ulrich Tolle become Eckhart Tolle?
That happens during this transitional post-Cambridge phase. He changes his name from Ulrich to Eckhart. Now, the story behind the name is interesting because there are a couple of versions.
The most common theory I've heard is that it's an homage to Meister Eckhart.
Exactly. Meister Eckhart was this major German Christian mystic from the 13th century. A lot of his teachings about God and the soul and letting go have really strong parallels with Tolle's own philosophy. It seems like a very logical, very obvious connection.
But that's not Tolle's story, is it?
No, he tells a much more mystical version. He claims he had a dream where he saw a stack of books, and the name on the spine of the topper was Eckhart. And in the dream, he just knew that he was the author.
Okay.
And then shortly after, he says he bumped into a psychic friend he knew, and she, completely out of the blue, started calling him Eckhart. She just said, I don't know why, but I'm supposed to call you Eckhart.
That's a little too perfect.
It's very synchronistic, isn't it? But he took it as a sign from the universe. He felt the name Ulrich was part of that old, heavy, depressed self that had died. Eckhart was the new beginning, or the new non-self.
It's a good story. It fits the brand.
It does. It marks that final shedding of the old academic identity.
So how does he transition from the park bench to actually doing something? How does he become a teacher?
It seems to have happened very organically. He wasn't trying to start a movement. He was just this quiet, peaceful guy sitting in the park. But people he knew, former students from Cambridge and acquaintances, they started to notice.
They noticed he wasn't a wreck anymore.
They noticed the change. They saw this profound stillness in him. They'd sit and talk with him, and they started asking him questions. What happened to you? How are you so calm all the time?
So he became an accidental spiritual counselor.
Pretty much. He started working with small groups, then individuals. He did this for about 5 years in London, working as a counselor and a spiritual teacher.
And then he moved to Glastonbury for a while.
He did. Which, of course, if you're going to be a mystic in England, that's kind of the place to be.
The New Age capital of the UK.
Exactly. And then in 1995, he makes the big jump. He moves to Vancouver, Canada.
Why Vancouver? Any particular reason?
He said he felt a connection to the west coast of North America, to the space and the nature there. He settled in Vancouver, and that's also where he met his future partner, Kim Eng, who is now a major teacher in her own right within his organization.
And it's in Vancouver that the next chapter begins, the publishing chapter.
Yes, this is where he writes The Power of Now.
The book that changed
The
everything.
book that kicked it all off. It was first published in 1997.
Was it an instant bestseller? Did it just explode onto the scene?
No, not at all. It was a very humble beginning. It was first published by a tiny local company called Namaste Publishing. The first print run was only 3,000 copies.
That's nothing.
It's a garage operation. He was literally driving around Vancouver himself, dropping copies off at small independent bookstores.
But people started reading it.
People read it, and they felt something, and then they told their friends to read it. It was pure word of mouth, and that word of mouth started to build until it got the attention of a bigger publisher. In 1999, New World Library re-released it on a much larger scale.
And that's when the momentum really started.
That's when the rocket started to fuel up. It wasn't in orbit yet, but it was on the launch pad.
So before we get to the full-blown explosion, let's just clarify what's actually in the book. What is the core philosophy?
It's a synthesis, really. The sources are clear that he draws heavily from various traditions. Zen Buddhism is a huge one. Sufism, the mystical branch of Islam. Hinduism, specifically the non-dual school of Advaita Vedanta. And Christian mysticism, like Meister Eckhart.
But he's not a Buddhist or a Christian himself.
No, and this is a key part of his appeal. He remains completely unaffiliated with any single religion. He sort of distills what he sees as the essential truth from all of them.
So he strips away the dogma, the rituals, the cultural baggage.
Exactly. He gets it down to what he sees as the core mechanism of human suffering and the way out. The central goal is the dissolution of that mind-made self, the ego.
He argues that all our unhappiness comes from our minds.
Pretty much. That our minds are either obsessively dwelling on the past, which creates things like regret, guilt, resentment,
Or anxiously projecting into the future, which creates fear, stress, worry.
Right. And his radical claim is that the past and future are illusions. They don't actually exist anywhere except as thoughts in your head. The only thing that is ever real is this exact moment, the now.
Be here now. It's a simple idea. It's been said before.
It's incredibly simple to say, but as he points out, it's profoundly difficult to do. I mean, just try it. Try to stop your mind from thinking for even 10 seconds.
It's basically impossible. The thoughts just keep coming.
Right. So the book is filled with techniques, things like watching the thinker, which means becoming the silent observer of your own thoughts instead of being lost in them. Feeling the inner body, which is a way of grounding yourself in physical sensation.
And this message, this very simple but difficult message, clearly resonated with a lot of people who were just tired of their own mental chatter.
It resonated deeply, and it especially resonated with one person who had the biggest megaphone on planet Earth.
The Oprah effect.
The Oprah effect. In the year 2000, Oprah Winfrey read The Power of Now and recommended it in her magazine O.
And in the publishing world, that's like getting hit by a bolt of lightning, in a good way.
It's the Midas touch. Everything she recommends turns to gold.
So what did that do to the sales?
It put the book on the map. In August 2000, it hit the New York Times bestseller list for the first time. 2 years later, in 2002, it finally hit #1.
Number one, 5 years after it was first published.
That's incredible staying power. And it just kept selling. By 2008, it was in 33 languages. As late as 2011, it was still on the paperback advice list after 102 weeks.
Wow. But that was really just the warm-up act, wasn't it? Because his next major book, A New Earth, went even bigger.
Oh, A New Earth was a different dimension of success. He wrote Stillness Speaks in 2003, which was a more meditative book. But A New Earth, which came out in 2005, was the one that Oprah truly embraced.
In January 2008, she didn't just recommend it in her magazine.
No, she selected it for her book club, which is the holy grail for any author.
And the numbers that followed are just, they're hard to comprehend.
They're staggering. In the first 4 weeks after her announcement, 3.5 million copies of the book were shipped.
3.5 million. In a month. That's Harry Potter numbers.
It's a publishing phenomenon.
Yeah.
It was the #1 book on the New York Times bestseller list 46 times in 2008 alone.
But they didn't just stop at the book club. This is where they did something really groundbreaking for the time.
They used the internet. This was 2008, remember? Streaming video was still relatively new. But Oprah and Eckhart produced a 10-week online webinar series.
So they would sit down together live and go through the book chapter by chapter.
Yes. They'd discuss the concepts, Tolle would lead short meditations, and people could call in via Skype with questions.
And did people tune in?
In unbelievable numbers. The third webinar alone had more than 11 million unique viewers.
11 million people. That's the population of a medium-sized country, all logging on to watch two people sit on couches and talk about the human ego.
The servers literally crashed. The demand was so overwhelming. By the end of it all, by October 2009, those webinar classes had been accessed 35 million times. It was a global classroom.
That partnership really cemented him as a spiritual superstar.
It did. After that, the recognition just piled up. In 2011, the Watkins Review, which tracks this sort of thing, ranked him the #1 most spiritually influential living person.
The head of the Dalai Lama.
That year, yes. And he's consistently been in their top 5 ever since, which is a feat only he and the Dalai Lama share.
They've even appeared together, haven't they?
They have. At the Vancouver Peace Summit in 2009, it creates this kind of surreal image, The Dalai Lama, the head of a 1,000-year-old religious lineage, sharing a stage as an equal with the guy who used to sit on a park bench in London.
It really speaks to the democratization of spirituality in the modern West.
That's a good way of putting it. You don't need the ancient tradition or the robes anymore. You just need the best-selling book and the aura of peace.
And just to prove this isn't old news, Oprah recently went back to that well.
She did. In January of 2025, just a little while ago, she selected A New Earth for her book club for a second time.
Has she ever done that before in the history of the club?
Never. It is the only book to ever be chosen twice. She clearly feels the message is as relevant, or maybe even more relevant, now than it was back in 2008.
Okay, so the success is undeniable, the reach is global. But you don't get that big without attracting some serious criticism.
Not a chance. The bigger the phenomenon, the bigger the target on your back.
So let's shift gears and talk about that critical reception, because it is, as we said, deeply polarized.
It really is, and the critiques tend to fall into a few different camps. You've got the people who critique his style and his originality, and then you have the much more intense theological critiques.
Let's start with the fans. What do the supporters say makes him so special?
The word that comes up over and over again is accessibility. Reviewers like Carter Phipps praise his clear writing and the depth of his insight.
The argument being that the original source material, like ancient Zen texts or Sufi poetry, can be really difficult to penetrate for a modern reader.
Exactly. They're dense, they're culturally specific, they're often paradoxical. Writers like William Bloom and Judith Kendra credit Tolle with creating a contemporary synthesis. He takes these arcane ancient teachings and translates them into a language that a 21st century person in the West can actually understand and apply.
He's the great simplifier, the translator.
Right. But that very act of simplification is what his critics absolutely despise.
They see it as dumbing down.
Or worse. In 2003, Andrea Sachs, writing for Time magazine, famously dismissed The Power of Now as being awash in spiritual mumbo-jumbo.
Mumbo-jumbo. That's a pretty brutal takedown. It suggests it's just meaningless, feel-good nonsense.
It does. It implies it's just a word salad of vague platitudes. And then you have critics like James Robinson from The Observer, who called his work a hodgepodge of pseudoscience, New Age philosophy, and teaching borrowed from established religions.
The borrowed part is key there. The accusation isn't just that it's simple, but that it's unoriginal.
That's a huge part of the critique.
Yeah.
That he's not actually saying anything new. He's just remixing the Buddha, Jesus, Krishnamurti, and Meister Eckhart and presenting it as this grand revelation.
Like a greatest hits album of Eastern spirituality.
Precisely. And making an awful lot of money in the process, which fuels the cynicism.
And some people argue his success has nothing to do with the content at all.
Right. Sarah Nelson from Publishers Weekly made the argument that his success was really about market timing. He came along at the perfect moment when public interest in self-help and spirituality was surging, but traditional church attendance was declining. He was the right product for a specific cultural need.
So on one side, he's a genius who makes profound wisdom accessible. On the other, he's a derivative New Age guru who got lucky.
And that's just the secular debate. When you get into the theological arguments, it gets much, much more heated.
This is where things get really contentious, right? Because he freely quotes the Bible, he talks about Jesus and Christ consciousness, but he is definitively not a Christian.
And that fact creates this fascinating split within the Christian world itself. Some theologians see him as an ally, while others see him as a profound threat.
Let's talk about the allies first. Who are the bridge builders, the Christian thinkers who are defending Eckhart Tolle?
You have people like the theologian Andrew Ryder, who argues that even if Tolle doesn't use the traditional language of faith, he's helping people get back in touch with the deepest source of being.
So the idea is that he's keeping a spiritual spark alive for people who have walked away from the church.
Yes, that he's a gateway. Stafford Beatty, a scholar of religion, draws direct lines between Tolle's joy of being and the goals of the great Christian mystics. He argues that the stillness Tolle describes is the same contemplative silence that figures like St. John of the Cross were seeking.
And then there's a really big name, Richard Rohr.
A huge name. Richard Rohr is a Franciscan friar, a major Catholic author. And he goes so far as to credit Tolle with helping to reintroduce ancient Christian mystical practices to modern believers.
How does he figure that?
Rohr's argument is that a lot of modern Christianity has become very intellectual, very doctrinal. It's about believing the correct list of things. It's all happening in the head. He sees Tolle as someone who helps people break through that mental noise to experience God directly through contemplation, rather than just thinking about God.
So Rohr sees him as a tool to help Christians get back to the experiential roots of their own faith.
As a catalyst, yes, to move from belief to experience.
Okay, that's the pro-Christian argument. What about the con side? I have to assume the evangelical world is not throwing a party for him.
The con side argues that Tolle's teachings are not just different from Christianity, but are fundamentally incompatible with it, and even dangerous.
Dangerous how?
Well, take James Beverly, an evangelical professor. He argues that Tolle's entire system denies the most central convictions of the Christian faith. Specifically, the distinction between human beings, God, and Jesus.
Because Tolle preaches a message of oneness.
Exactly. Tolle says we are all part of one divine consciousness. We are God. That sounds lovely and inclusive, but for an Orthodox Christian, that's a red line.
Because it erases the distinction between the creator and the creation.
It completely erases it. If we are God, then the entire Christian story of sin, separation from God, and the need for redemption through Christ becomes meaningless. Tolle says we don't need redemption from a savior. We just need to realize we were divine all along.
That is a massive, unbridgeable theological gap.
It is. And then you get the even stronger accusation from the theologian John Stackhouse.
The supreme religion argument.
That's the one. Stackhouse accuses Tolle of creating his own supreme religion that positions itself as being superior to all existing faiths.
So the whole "I'm not affiliated with any religion" stance is actually a claim of being above all religions.
That's Stackhouse's argument. He says Tolle's approach is to subject all established religions to this withering criticism, point out their flaws, and then present his own distilled teaching as the one pure, universal truth that they all fail to grasp.
It's seen as a kind of intellectual arrogance masked as humility.
Yes, and Stackhouse says this gives people exactly what the modern ego wants: spirituality without any of the difficult parts.
Spirituality without accountability.
Exactly. You get the peace and the good feelings, but you don't have the accountability of a community that demands of service or the weight of a historical tradition. It's a pick and choose spirituality that's all about personal feeling.
That's a very heavy charge. Does Tolle ever engage with these critics? Does he debate them?
Almost never. His public stance is to remain above the fray. He would view these theological debates as just more mind stuff. More ego battling against ego.
Which is a very convenient position to take, isn't it? If you criticize me, that's just proof that your ego is running the show.
It is the perfect, unassailable defense. But, to be fair, it is entirely consistent with his core philosophy.
And yet, for a man who claims to be beyond all that, he does pop up in some very unexpected, very mainstream places.
He really does. Which brings us to his surprising relevance in pop culture. We're not just talking about Oprah's book club anymore.
No, we're talking about, of all things, hip-hop.
Kendrick Lamar.
This was a genuine shock to me when I was reading the sources. Kendrick Lamar's 2022 album, Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers.
A landmark album. It's dense, it's confessional, it's about generational trauma, therapy, infidelity, the crushing weight of fame.
And Eckhart Tolle is a narrator on it. He's not just an influence. His voice is woven throughout the entire album.
He is positioned as Kendrick's spiritual teacher, his guide through this incredibly painful psychological journey that the album chronicles.
It's wild. You have arguably the most important, critically acclaimed rapper of his generation, known for his raw, gritty storytelling, turning to the quiet man from the park bench for guidance.
It just shows you how far these ideas have penetrated. This isn't just for, a specific demographic of spiritual seekers anymore. It's reached the very heart of popular culture.
Why do you think Kendrick Lamar, of all people, gravitated to Tolle's work?
A lot of the album is about what Tolle calls the pain body. That's one of his major concepts, this idea that we all carry a semi-dormant energy field of accumulated emotional pain from our past.
And that pain body can be triggered and take you over.
Right. And Kendrick's album is a deep, painful exploration of the pain body in himself, in his family, in his community. Tolle's work gave him a framework and a language to deconstruct that trauma in real time for his listeners.
It really proves the accessibility argument of his supporters, doesn't it? That language works just as well on a Pulitzer-winning rap album as it does in a self-help book.
It's incredibly versatile.
And there was also a movie, wasn't there, based on one of his books?
Yes, a children's book he wrote called Milton's Secret. It was adapted into a film in 2016.
And it had some big names in it.
Donald Sutherland was in it. And, somewhat surprisingly, Michelle Rodriguez.
Michelle Rodriguez from the Fast and Furious movies.
The very same. It wasn't a huge box office hit, but it shows the effort to translate this message into every possible medium. Books, webinars, music, children's films.
Okay, so let's try to tie this all together. We've gone from the origin, the despair, to the rise, the global fame, the intense controversy, and the deep cultural impact.
From the void of 1977 to being the voice of spiritual guidance on a Kendrick Lamar album. It's quite a journey.
It really is. And it leaves us with that core tension we've been circling the whole time. Is he, as his critics say, just a clever repackager of other people's ideas? A purveyor of mumbo-jumbo who got a lucky break with Oprah?
Or is he, as his supporters would argue, a necessary translator for our time? A man who makes ancient wisdom accessible for a modern world that is drowning in anxiety and distraction.
A world that maybe can't or won't read the dense original texts.
Exactly. Maybe in 2025, you need the calm guy in the sweater vest on YouTube to just tell you to take a deep breath and notice the feeling in your hands. Maybe that's the entry point now.
It brings up one final, I think, provocative thought for me, a question to leave everyone listening with.
Let's hear it.
Tully's entire spiritual journey, his whole philosophy, it's built on the epiphany that the self, the ego, the personality is a mind-made illusion, and that this illusion is the root cause of all human suffering.
Right. The self isn't something to be fixed. It's the problem itself.
And yet, we live in a society that is completely pathologically obsessed with the self, finding yourself, building your personal brand, living your truth, self-care. We worship the self.
Self-actualization has become the dominant religion of the West.
Precisely. But if Tolle is even remotely correct, then all of that effort we pour into curating our identities on social media, building our careers, crafting our personal narrative, it's just building a more elaborate, more comfortable prison.
We're just reinforcing the very thing that he says causes the pain.
So the question is, what if the goal isn't to find yourself, or build yourself, or improve yourself? What if the real path to peace is to let the self collapse?
The way he did on that night in 1977.
Exactly. It's a terrifying thought for most of us, the death of who we think we are. But for him, that was the beginning of everything.
That's a question worth sitting with. In silence, perhaps.
Something to think about the next time you're trying to figure out the perfect Instagram caption. Are you building the cage, or are you looking for the door?
A powerful thought.
That's it for this deep dive into the quiet explosion of Eckhart Tolle.
Thanks for listening. We'll see you on the Now.